Hey everyone, it's Ken from Skillwave. Earlier today I was working on a little bit of a project here where I was trying to do a rough analysis of earnings powers for different countries around the world, and I thought I'd share the process that I went through in order to build this solution and sort of polish it up. So this involves a variety of techniques that we actually teach at Skillwave in a variety of our different courses. It's going to involve a little bit of ChatGPT. It's going to involve a little bit of monkey tools, not because we have to, but just because we can accelerate some things along the way with it, and sort of give you a look at the process that I went through as I started to build this thing out. So if you're ready and you're interested, let's dive in and take a little look. The first part, of course, started with trying to find some data. So what I was looking for was median income for different countries around the world. I used my favorite tool to try and find those, and that, of course, is the Google search engine, which eventually landed me at this worldpopulationreview.com. And this is kind of a neat little website here. If you notice down the bottom here where it says hover over country for details, as you sort of mouse over the different countries, it pulls up a table here with their median and mean incomes and the GDP of the country. There are some that are gray, like India here, for example, which doesn't include the median income, which, to be honest, is what I'm most interested in. At the same time, I'm really just looking for a general gauge as to what's going on here. So I'm not super concerned if a few are missing, like, one of my favorite countries, New Zealand, which has been completely ignored altogether, which is just makes me sad. But regardless, let's take a look at what we've got. This data will work for the purposes that I needed, and that's the important part. If you're curious as to why median versus mean, there is a description on this webpage about how we sort of take out, the millionaires and billionaires to get back the, more common folk, earnings that we actually have in this case. But the important part about this page to me was this table. There's lots of rows in it, but the nice thing was we have country, median income, mean income, GDP per capita, what year the data came from, but most importantly, we have the ability to download the CSV file, which means I don't have to do any web scraping to get this data, which is lovely. I just click this button, put in my email address, they emailed me the file, which I saved on my computer. So that is brilliant because, man, there is no easier way to pull data into Power Query than via CSV. Speaking of which, why don't we go do that now? So I'm here in a brand new workbook, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my Monkey Tools tab. If you're not familiar with Monkey Tools, you can install it for free. It does have some pro features as well, which I'm going to use today, but for right now, the most important thing to look at is that our Get Data button is Excel's standard Get Data button. It's on the same tab as the Manage Data Model, which is Excel's standard Manage Data Model button, but it's going to save you flipping tabs back and forth. So I'm going to start with Get Data from File from Text CSV. And we're going to go find the file that I downloaded, choose Import, and then we're going to click the important button to the left of Cancel, which in this case is Transform Data, which will launch us into the Power Query editor so we can make some changes to our data. Now, before we go too far here, I'm going to set up some folders on the right side here. I'm going to go right-click. We're going to move to group here. I'm going to create a new group, first off, called Data Model. I'm going to go move this again because that's not where I want it, into a new group called Staging Queries. And then I'm going to move it one more time, move to group, new group, and this one is going to be Raw Data Connections. Do I need to move the query itself each time? No, I just wanted to actually set these things up, but you want to set up your topmost folders first, and I like to have mine set this way. Raw Data is the roots of the tree, Staging Queries, that's the trunk, and the Data Model is the beautiful foliage that everybody wants to look at. Now, let's rename this query. This is going to be Raw Data Income. I think I'm going to put a dash in there. So there we go. And inside here, I'm not going to do anything with this. This raw data query is just the well of all the data I have access to. Instead, I'm going to right click and reference it. And I'm going to choose to make this my staging-income query, which I'm going to move into the Staging Queries folder to keep organized. Now inside the Staging Query, I'm going to do some preliminary cleanup. The first thing I'm going to do, we're going to rename country so that it actually has a capital C. I'm going to rename these horrible column names to drop off this median income by country, which is the data set name. Get rid of that. We'll get rid of it from here too. I'm going to get rid of it from this one. So we're just double clicking, selecting, deleting. There we are. And then at this point, I'm not really all that interested in keeping the year. So I'm actually going to grab country, grab GDP per capita PPP, right click, remove other columns. And what I like about doing that is it drops the column, but unlike to just straight out remove or delete, we actually get a gear icon so I can always check on this later if I want to bring back some different columns or remove some of the other ones as well. Okay, so those are our raw data and staging queries. We're all set up there. So I want to load these, but I don't really want them to go anywhere. I want to load them as connection only. My next queries are going to go to the data model though, so I'm going to just take the time to basically save these into the workbook. Now I have customized load defaults. So in this case here, you can see these are loaded to connection only and everything is good to go. All right, first prep is done. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin up my fact and dimension tables for my data model. I'm going to start from staging income. We're going to go right click. We're going to choose to reference. And the first query that I'm going to make is my dimension, which I'm going to call countries. I'll just drag that into the data model folder to stay organized. And all I need for the countries table is to right click on country, remove other columns. Now there are 161 distinct and unique values here, so I know each of these are individuals that don't repeat, which is great, but it's always a good idea to remove duplicates on your primary key just to be safe. So I'm going to do that right now, remove duplicates. And then another quick little pro tip here is as your last step of your data model table loads, you should always reset the data types just to make sure that you never get a mixture that throws it into a state that Power Pivot has to decide, because that can actually mess things up that way. So for right now, there we go. Country set up as text, everything looks good. Now my staging income, I'm going to reference again. This is going to be my stats table. And on my stats table, I'm not actually going to remove anything. You think, well, okay, so do you really need to have a separate countries table? No, I don't. I could just load my stats table in there and use that for everything, but I'm a big fan of building for the future and expansion, so I always want to set up my proper star schema in advance just in case this model gets expanded later. Both those tables are done. We've created two in this one session. We get to choose one load destination for them. I'm going to go close and load two because I want both of these to load to the data model. So we're going to say OK and wait while it loads 161 rows for each of these tables. And there we go. Now, the next step, I'm going to hit on Manage Data Model here. We're going to go to Diagram View, and we're going to link our country to our country. The important part here is that the stats table has the columns we're going to aggregate. This is going to be our fact table. So we drag from our fact to our dimension to make sure the relationship is set up the correct direction here. We want the star, the many side on our fact table. You should also always hide the field on the many side of the relationship to force people to use your dimensional field in your filters and things like that. In addition though, because I'm going to make explicit measures, I'm going to right click and hide all of these three columns from Client Tools as well. And speaking of explicit measures, I'm now going to go and create some. Now we could go to the Power Pivot tab, add measure, new measure, and actually write our own, but I'm actually going to make this a little faster. I'm going to go and create multiple explicit measures using Monkey Tools. This is a pro feature. We're going to say next, and inside here, we're going to make a column called GDP, or a measure rather. I'm going to change this one to average of mean income. So our mean is going to be average income. We'll make this one a whole number. I don't really care about the decimals here. And for our last one, we're going to choose to make a median income as well. There we are. And whole number. Beautiful. Create. Boom. 3 measures created with whole number formatting. Love that. Nice and fast. And there we go. I'm now going to go and create my pivot table. So we'll select inside cell B4. We're going to go from data model. And on our data model, I'm going to put my country on rows. And on my stats, I'm going to throw my median income. And there we are. We now have a nice little pivot table with median income by country. But the thing that I'm interested in seeing is how does this compare to the US? So in order to do that, I need to write a measure to figure out what the US median income is. So for this, we're going to go to the Power Pivot tab, Measures, New Measure. I'm going to store this on the stats table, and this is going to be median income USA. I'm going to go and make this window a little bit bigger here so I've got some room to go and do this. And we're going to write in calculate because we're going to modify the filter context. We're going to take our median income, and what we're going to do is we're going to go and choose where our country's country equals United States. And I've already looked in the data to know that that's what the value is in here, is United States. It's not USA or anything else. This is exactly what's written in the table. I'm going to go number, whole number with a 1,000 separator. I can check the formula if I'm feeling, want to be safe. And at this point, when I say OK, I now get the median income showing up all the way down. And this is what the US median income is based on this data set, 24,327 after taking out the, Jeff Bezos's and the Elon Musk's and Satya Nadella's and so forth. All right. Now, the next thing I want to figure out is what is median income as a percentage of median income USA? Once again, we're going to write another measure. So for this guy, here is our measure. This is going to be percent of USA median income. And this one here is going to be using one of my favorite functions, the divide function, for a nice safe dividing that won't give us any errors. We're going to divide the median income by the median income from USA. And if there are any errors or zeros or whatever else, then we're going to put in a blank instead. And that way it will suppress items that we don't actually need there. We can now go and say, let's do a number. We'll make it a percentage with 1 decimal point and 1,000 separator. And boom, we now have our percent of USA median income. So that's brilliant. Albania at 33.58 of 24,327 is 13.8%. Great. But now I want to make this look a little better. Do I really want to see that on every row of the pivot table? No. It'd be nice to see it in one place, maybe at the top as a summary. So here's what I can do. US median income. I can write a cube value function targeting this workbook data model and pull up the measures for median income USA. I'll close my quotes and close my parenthesis here. And what you'll notice is that we get the same value, which means that I really don't need this on the pivot table. Brilliant. So that makes that look a little bit better there. The next thing I'd like to do though, is I'd like to actually add some filters in here, and I want to be able to filter by region. I want to go and take a look at, show me all the countries in Europe, show me all the countries in North America or South America. But unfortunately, I don't have that in my data. And where can I get it? Well, I could set up a table and go through and classify each one, but that seems to be a lot of work. So this is where I decided, why don't I go and try and leverage ChatGPT in order to classify this data for me? So here we go. If I go to ChatGPT, you'll notice that my first query was, let me provide you with a list of countries and have you classify them by world regions such as, and I gave it the regions I wanted. I even spelt Caribbean wrong. ChatGPT says, sure, no problem. You want me to classify all these countries? I can do that for you. Give me the list of countries. So I copied the range of data in the pivot table, selected the first column of the pivot table, Control-C, came in here, Control-V, hit enter, and pasted all these guys in. And ChatGPT said, sure. And then it spit back data like this, Europe, and a whole bunch of bullet points. And then Africa. Now, I mean, I'm really good with Power Query, but I don't want to clean all that up. So I said, look, ChatGPT, that's fantastic and everything else. I didn't tell it that, but can you put it into a table? And then it gave me a pivoted output, which is kind of gross. So this really isn't so good. And I think I might have actually hit enter twice on this one because it kept on going. I had to stop it before I finally said, can you put in a 2-column table that has columns for country and region? And it said, sure. And it gave me this. And I said, this is fantastic. Let's go copy all of that data, Control-C. We'll go back to Excel. And what we're going to do is we're going to go and say, right-click, paste. Nice. We've got some nice data. Now, I'm going to hit Control-T to turn this into a table. Okay, that's the shortcut, of course. Now, if you're not using Monkey Tools, you won't see this dialog. You'll get a table called Table 1, but with Monkey Tools, even on a free license, you can actually go and say, hey, I want to call this table regions, create a connection-only query, hit OK, and boom, there we go. We've got a regions table, and we have a connection-only query already set up. I can rename my worksheet. Oops, that's not how you spell regions at all. And there we go, regions. Nice. And I think I might just go and rename this one to report. There we go. Let me go and edit regions for a second. All right, I'm going to move this into my raw data connections folder because it is a raw data connection. And then I'm going to go back to countries. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to merge queries. We're going to go to our regions table based on country and say OK and expand our region. Now, why don't I just switch everything out to use the regions table for countries instead? Well, because this was static data that I copied and pasted. This one might not if I refresh it. So I always want to make sure that I've got all of the current data there. And if I end up missing a region, well, I can always go and fill it in manually. Okay, so that's why I did it that way. But for right now, that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. So let's go and say close and load. We'll let the countries table reload here to get our new 161 rows with 2 columns worth of data. And now we can come back over here, open up our pivot table field list. There is region. So I can go and drop this right onto this and uh-oh, look at my column. I've lost my percent of US median income. Now the issue in this case comes down to the way I wrote my DAX. Notice that in this case here, Canada and Mexico and United States, the way the calculate works is that we're saying, I want you to override whatever's on this row with United States. And that's fine because there is a United States within the North America table. But there is no United States with a Europe/Asia row or a Europe row. Okay, so that's why we see all these blanks in here. So we're going to need to fix that. So to do this, let me go back to Power Pivot, Measures, Manage, Measure. I'm going to come back to Median Income USA. We'll just open this thing up and we're going to add something in here. And I always like to start with a little bit more dialed in here than going full on crazy. So we're going to go with region, countries, all regions. So we're going to remove the region from the filter context and override things with United States. And that should give us back our single country. We say OK and close. Boom, there we go. Everything looks good. Now I do want to move my Russia one out of here. I'm not real happy with where that one lives. I think I want to put this one in Asia. You could debate that it's Europe. I don't know which one is technically correct. I think it depends on the data source. So let me just go and find, well, let me do that in a little bit because there's also something else that I want to notice about this. I'll come back to this with the filter. We'll change data in a second here. So let's go and take a look at our regions. I'm going to add a slicer. Right click, add a slicer. I'm going to hold down my Alt key and snap it into the top left corner. And then I'm going to go and say, let's snap this down to column A to the top of row 8. I'm going to grab my slicer and just increase the column widths. And there we go. That looks pretty good. So now here's what we can see. Europe, well, let me expand everything here. Expand entire field. So here's all of our European countries. Europe, Asia, we've got Russia, which I think I want to move the classification of that one. Caribbean, oh, well, this is weird. Why is there only one Caribbean country? Well, because the way that ChatGPT organized the data, Belize, Haiti, Jamaica, all of these ended up in South America, which is not ideal. So I need to fix this data. How do I do it? Well, I can go through and manually change these things, and I've actually already done that. So I'm just going to go and grab another workbook I have off screen here. I'm going to bring this back, say Control V, and then the other one that I didn't have in that data set is I'm just going to scroll down and find Russia here, and I'm going to move Russia to just straight out Asia. Okay. So we're just making some modifications data because ChatGPT's quality wasn't the greatest here. Let me clear this out. Let me go and right click on my pivot table and refresh. We're just going to wait for the data to actually reload at this point in time. And here we go. So now if we go back and we take a look, you'll notice that we're missing the Europe/Asia category. If I take a look for Asia, we can see that Russia is in here. And if I look at the Caribbean, I've got a few more Caribbean countries, which is the way that it should be here. Now, let me clear that off. I want to do a couple of other things here. I want to give you another way to drill down into this data that's going to be a little bit easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over to my Power Query, back into countries. And I'm going to go to add a new column here, which is based on the extraction of the first characters in the country column. I'm going to grab the first one. This gives me a first characters, which I'm going to change the name of here to starts with. Okay. Now I could have renamed this by double clicking on it. I chose to just do it in the formula bar. There's no performance difference. But at the end of the day, I can now go home, close and load. We can let the data reload for us here. And then once it's reloaded, I can now go back to my pivot table, right click, add as a slicer. I'm going to move this over here. We're going to go snap it to the grid and bring it up to about there. And I'm going to dial up my slicer columns here. So we're going to go up and see where does it look reasonable. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing, right? So this is the minimum number of rows I need here. I don't like this because it starts to, lose some of these guys. We don't want that. I'm not really a big fan of having a single data point on the end here. So I'm going to balance this out just a little bit more. That gives it a bit more even distribution. And then I'm also going to change the caption to be country starts with. And now that looks a little bit nice, okay? All right, so with that in place, everything looks pretty good. Let me go and filter down to see, what we got for, oh, interesting. When I filter to J, notice that we got Japan, Jordan, Jamaica, but we've lost our percent of US median income. And this is because, of course, is that we're filtering out all the records that have United States, and therefore, we've got no United States starting with a J, so we have a blank. So I need to make another modification to my measure to make it a little bit looser than what it is right now. So I'm going to go back to this one more time. It's a really big thing about, when you're building these things, always test what you've got, right? You always want to see how are users going to use it to make sure that it's going to work correctly. So I'm going to remove the region column. I'm going to go with a flat out all on my countries. And at that point, it looks a lot better there. So nice. We've got all these different things in the right place. Jamaica's in the Caribbean where it belongs. There we go. So I can close that one off. Now, another thing you might notice here too is that when I go right click and collapse all my fields, notice how I've lost my E on my US median income. I'm not really a big fan of that. So here's what I'm going to do. And expand the entire field here. I'm going to go right click on my pivot table options. We're going to go and choose to uncheck the auto fit. Might as well fill in our empty cells with zeros. And at this point in time, I won't have that resizing thing take on anymore. Now, I want to do one more thing here. I want to put in a nice little title here. This is a comparison of median income versus USA. And I want to make that title a little bit bigger, but I want you to watch what happens to my country starts with slicer as I'm doing this. 1, 2, 3, 4, there we go. Notice how it's starting to move down. That's not so awesome. So I'm just going to move these back here. 4, there we are. I'm going to change something on this guy here. We're going to go right click, size and properties. We're going to don't move or size with cells, okay? And now as I come back and start increasing the size of this, the slicers will actually stay put, which is kind of an important component here. So our column widths aren't going to be shifting, our slicers aren't going to be moving around as things are filtered and whatnot. So that looks a little bit nicer here. I'm just going to close this one down. I'm going to close this guy off here. Maybe I want to go back and say, hey, let's get rid of the grid lines. There's one more thing that I'm not loving on this though. Where do I put my cursor that I don't have my highlighting column section set up? This is the final sort of thing that I would do. I'm going to insert column A and then hide column A. I'm going to insert row 1 and then I'm going to hide row 1. And you think, why are you doing that? Because then I'm going to select cell A1 from the name box, and you'll notice that you can't see any cell selected because it's just this tiny little pixel up in the top left-hand corner, and it's just a nice way to save the workbook and send it out if I want someone else to play with it. So there you go. That is a walkthrough of a variety of the different techniques that we actually teach at Skillwave in our different courses here on how to go through and do a little bit of analysis, practical work in the real world, mixing tools like Excel, Power Query, Power Pivot, Monkey tools, some web page data, and ChatGPT all into the solution in order to build up a nice usable solution that we can provide to somebody else to go and play with. So hopefully you've learned a cool new trick here. If you'd like to come and learn more, you should always definitely check out our Skillwave catalog, and hopefully we'll see you in future.